Greetings everybody, my name's Tommy the Game Master and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since I've done a video that just ranted and raved on a game story, so why don't we get cracking about the ups and downs and many disappointments of Final Fantasy VIII story, and why it's one of the worst narratives when it comes to the Final Fantasy series. Warning, I will go into full spoilers. I'm not going to go through every point of the game story, but I'm not going to hold back any of the criticisms due to the plot either. And I do feel like the game is over 20 years old, so yeah, I'm not spoiling anything brand new. Still, if you are excited and trying to experience this game for the first time, I do suggest skipping this video. Okay, let me address one thing first in this full-on story critique, and it's the same thing I addressed in the story segment of my full review, and I'm going to expand on it here. I like Laguna Lori too. He's a good character and probably one of the best seen in a JRPG. He's not an angsty teen. He starts out his story as a young soldier in the middle of the war. He does decide to immediately go AWOL and return to the city for a few hours to hear a local celebrity named Julia sing. After the performance, she invites him to her room and they fall in love with each other. That says until his next mission takes him to an unknown enemy rune in order to find out what they're digging up, because you know old ruins oftentimes mean doomsday weapons in JRPGs, and during the process of checking it out, they almost get captured. His friends all get away, but one of them, this big guy named Ward, who's always the one in charge of keeping Laguna in line in the group, gets his voice injured, and Laguna himself washes ashore in a distant town and takes over a year to recover. In the meantime, he's absent. Recovering, he finds the town he's in is always being attacked by monsters and decides to stay as the town's protector and to protect the two people who helped him out, Rain and her adoptive daughter Ellen. During this time where Laguna is playing protector, one of his old friends, Kiros, pays him a visit and decides to stay for a while, and here we learn that Julia went on to marry a military general, believing that Laguna was dead. Laguna easily accepts this and doesn't mourn for long, seeing how he's found someone who's made him happier with Rain, and the two shown in the ending do get at least engaged. But happiness doesn't last long as enemy soldiers come to the village and kidnap Ellen, and Laguna sets off, leaving a pregnant Rain behind so he can find their missing daughter. He does eventually find her in the enemy kingdom of Ethar and free her and help dispose of the enemy leader, a sorceress named Adele. And yeah, that is probably the most masculine woman I have ever seen, by trapping her in the special seal and then shooting her out into space. However, rather than being able to return to his happy life in Wind Hill, the town that he and Rain live in, Ethar is now in an uproar and someone needs to at least take the reins of power, lest it be destroyed by a power vacuum, and the only person to be able to do it is the dimwit who managed to barely trick their last tyrant into a stasis pod. Meaning Laguna is stuck with the job he never wanted or even signed up for, but hey, oftentimes the best men to wield power are the men who don't really want it or ever really seek it. He sends Ellen back to Rain until he can hopefully find a way to clean up the mess he's kind of made. But Rain dies giving birth to a son, and both the son and Ellen get sent off to an orphanage, where the people who run the orphanage find out that Ellen has a special power that makes her a target for dangerous people, so they decide to build a special boat for her so they can keep her out of sight from basically everyone. And Laguna, who is too busy trying to keep a country he managed to inherit under control, completely loses track of everything. So basically, this is a man who sets out with some really good intentions, but because he really does put the needs of the many over the needs of the few, ends up basically losing everything that was important to him. It is kind of tragic, and the game stories focused on him as the main character, it would have been so good. I mean, you see him act like an adult most of the time. Occasionally he's a goof, but most of the time you see him act like an adult. When the girl he loves marries another man, realizing he has it surprisingly good, where he's at, pursuing the woman who is taking care of him, he really finds true happiness and he doesn't really dwell on it again. And while it never shows his reaction when Rain dies, you do see he is still torn up about it when he meets Squall almost 20 years later, but he has the duty to the people of Ethar to keep their country running and make sure Adele stays locked up for their sake. You do find out some of his other misadventures through side quests in the main story. Yes, he's a good, well-developed character from the little screen time he gets. His two friends, Kiros and Ward, are very memorable and energetic too, and the chemistry in this group of friends is just astounding. If the main story centered around them, I would be putting Laguna up there with one of my favorite JRPG protagonists next to Yuri Lowell from Tales of Vesperia. But there's a problem. He's not the protag. He's, like I said, 5% of the game. The other 95% of the game, you're in the shoes of this asshat named Squall. And Squall is the worst. Okay, second worst. Distant second worst. But still, the worst. Oh, and before I leave Laganda, I do have to say they still screw up his parts a bit. You see, they insert his parts right whenever something good is about to go on in Squall's story. The moment you're about to care about what's going on, the moment it feels like the plot's going to build up momentum with Squall, you get hit with a Laguna scene, and he does start to feel more like an annoyance to the plot than an addition. Still, I have to say, if they went with the Laguna storyline, since it was supposed to be a 50-50, I think they would have made a better game story. So, way to go, Squaresoft. You screwed up the best thing in this game story and made it a hindrance just by poor placement. Congrats! It only gets worse from here, folks. While Laguna is a character that is an adult and he acts like an adult with very little angst, Squall's a teenager that if you could create a machine that could power itself off of teenage anxiety, he could probably power the whole planet for a freaking eternity. God, is Squall a disappointment of a character. Yeah, one character that you spend only about 4.5 hours of game time is completely overshadowed this nitwit that you can spend the remaining 30 to 50 hours with. His whole thing is he has abandonment issues, which I will get into later, and therefore he's afraid he's going to lose people around him, so he decides it's best not to get attached by acting like a giant douche to both his friends and comrades and generally treating them as nuisances. And of course he's cold to other people's feelings. Oh, and did I tell you he's a high school student in a military academy that trains people to be mercenaries called Seeds? Yes, folks, this game's story is like a high school anime. And you know, just by me saying that, this is going to be painful. Yeah, you know those animes or other JRPGs that are set in high school where they're learning magic or how to fly mechs or how to fly magic mechs so they can go to war and defeat the alien or whatever threat, but still at the same time have to worry about things like who to invite to the dance or who's going to win the next football game? Yeah, it's the exact kind of setting, but it's not bad. It's worse than bad. It's bland, and that's one of the reasons why it's just so painful. At any rate, you start off with him getting his trademark scar in a training fight against his rival Cypher. I wonder what the dialogue in the scene is actually like.
Was undeniable proof that we totally owned you, lamers.
At any rate, he is preparing for his final test where he has to actually join a group in actual combat, fighting to free a town from Galbanian control, led by Cypher, the same guy who gave him a scar earlier. Long story short, Cypher team does well, but only after their commander goes AWOL, looking for his own glory. So Squall and the rest of the crew pass the test to become Seeds, while Cypher is held back. At the party, he meets Rinoa, a girl who downright forces him to dance with her, and this scene is really funny. The next day, though, he takes his mission to Timber and finds out Rinoa is his client, and her contract with Sid, his boss, is basically a lifetime one. Until the country timber is no longer under Galbadian control, Squall has to do what Rinoa says. But before they have a chance to really start fighting Galbadia, another thing comes along to complicate the story. Galbadian's President Delling makes a broadcast that the country is now teaming up with a sorceress, a woman who can freely use magic and is super powerful to, you guess it, try to take over the world. Cypher, fearing that Rinoa and Squall may be in danger, does something stupid, takes the Galbadian president hostage on live TV, but the sorceress that Delling teamed up with appears and manages to do something that somehow brainwashes Cypher over to her side, and I am the most part going to stop this blow by blows exposition right now because quite frankly the rest of the game isn't that interesting, and I'll tell you why. It's all about the characters. They all suck! Let's start off with the villains. After all, the two previous games had such memorable villains. Well, let's see here. The villains we have here is Delling, who at first you're hoping might be like the Emperor from Final Fantasy VI, a man who is so power hungry that he gets duped into something by someone that ultimately destroys him and the world. Yeah, that does kind of happen, but where Gestalt seems to at least have a plan and some character and some deviousness to him. I mean, you get a scene where he is really sitting down and eating with the protagonist here to try to trick him. Delling is just kind of a stooge. He's a villain for the first disc during the whole timber section of the game, and then is quickly and unceremoniously killed by Edea. Edea is no Kefka though, because with Kefka we saw how bad he was. He could be poisoning a whole town and basically telling his underlings about the thoughts of killing innocents as casualties were no concern of his. Edea, we don't get to know her much at all as a villain because she kills the presidents, and we do find out a little bit about her later, but it actually makes her even a lamer villain. We only know she's evil because the game tells us she's evil and gives us a soundtrack that sounds intimidating. Every time she's near and you hear that soundtrack, yeah, it's a little intimidating, but that's all she has going for her. And even after she seizes power, we don't really see her. It's all Cypher who causes the trouble, and his reasons about going about it is basically he's a high school bully on a Disney Channel special, except he makes decisions that actually gets people killed. This is so lame. His main reason for betraying his comrades is he's always dreamed of being a knight to a sorceress, and that's basically it. That's the whole reason. That excuse is everything, folks. He's taking an advantage of due to a childish dream. I don't really feel a lot of sympathy for this guy. To make it worse, we never see Cypher take any punishment or accountability for his actions. No last minute turn to good or he was just brainwashed. He is evil basically from the scene where Edea captures him throughout the rest of his appearance. He does some terrible things too. In the game, he launches missiles against a school that has hundreds of young children training to be seeds, and we can say he probably killed a few hundred there. Launches attacks against Galbadian Garden, which nearly gets all his friends, or former friends, killed. And let's not forget, he also uses a weapon that Laguna found and tried to destroy on one of his side story escapades to induce a natural disaster in the Final Fantasy VIII universe called the Lunar Cry that almost destroys a country with, probably tens of thousands dead there, maybe even millions due to his actions. He also threatens the lives of Squall and his friends with some of the things he does to Rinoa. Does he do anything to make up for his crime or face any punishment? Nope. At the end, he is shown fishing. This guy has bloods of millions of peoples on his hands, and he goes fishing. No comeuppance. He needs to be in jail, if not hanging from the gallows. There's nothing in them that says he's ever really changed, nothing to show how he changes, if he was under a spell, nothing. And as pissed off as I get at Cypher, I guess I should thank him for one thing. If it wasn't for him, an actual good character from a much better game wouldn't exist. You see Final Fantasy VIII Cypher to influence Kingdom Hearts 2 Cypher, which greatly influenced the creation of Beat from The World Ends With You, a character who also takes a heel turn, but one that is fully fleshed out and kinda sympathetic. When you find out why he turns on Neku and the rest of the cast in The World Ends With You, you fully sympathize with them, and if you were stuck in his position, you would probably take the heel turn too, just like Beat. Unlike Cypher, who's just a bully who kills millions of people for his own selfish, quote-unquote, dreams. And yes, I get there's supposed to be a parallel between him and Squall. Cypher is only getting a chance to pretend to play a sorceress knight, while a real sorceress later in the game chooses Squall to become her protector and knight. So, what about Sorceress Adia? What kind of villain does she become? Well, not much, because she's quickly defeated the second time you run into her, and yes, we find out she's a good woman, and the woman who helped raise Squall. So who's the real villain? Well, a sorceress who can time travel and possess people from the future called Ultimisha. Her goal is to capture a woman named Ellen, who can send people's minds back further into the past, and Ultimisha wants her because she wants to use her to destroy all of time. Why? It's never really said. Supposedly she fears the assassination by a seed from the past, so by time traveling she crosses paths with Squall, which leads her to her death at the end of the game. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of complete idiocy, but at least she gets some revenge on Squall by giving him one hell of an acid trip towards the end of the game. I am not editing any of this. This is how part of the game ending actually runs. Anyways, let's get back on point. So the villains are dumb. What about the supporting cast? Well, I can sum up their history and backstory with the main complaint everyone has about this game's story. All the cast except for Rinoa has the same exact freaking backstory. They were all raised in the same orphanage that was run by Adia, and they completely forgot about it and forgot they knew each other beforehand because the GFs they used in combat can destroy childhood memories. Yes, it's that stupid. It also takes away individuality. You see, most JRPGs, the characters come from different places and have different ideals. Take example in Final Fantasy X, Wakka loses his brother because he was wielding an Al-Bhed weapon. Wakka disapproves of the weapon due to his spiritual beliefs. Wakka loses his brother in the fight and blames both the guns and the Al-Bhed and gains a hatred for the latter due to this situation. But two of the people who joined the party on their quest turn out to be Al-Bhed, Riku and Yuna. The latter one he has known and been friends with for years, and Wakka comes to a point where he has to deal with an existential crisis due to his hatred when it comes to the Al-Bhed. You don't get that here because everyone now has the same backstory, the same history, and the same worldview with the exception of Squall, who just goes on for being an asset for the sake of the story. And unlike his predecessor Cloud from 7, who had a reason to be so cold, he lost his best friend, his village, and family due to an attack by Sephiroth. His cold demeanor is just a little bit of insanity that he uses to keep himself sane. Here, there is none of that. Yeah, we get his mother died, but that's before he was old enough to really know her. He doesn't know that his father is still alive. Just sad that his adopted sister that he completely forgot about left him to go live alone out on a boat. But he's forgot all about this supposedly, so why he's so douchey? Well, they need him to be douchey so he can fall in love with Rinoa and change, and that's about it. No, I'm not kidding. The whole reason he's a douchebag is so they can write a love story between him and Rinoa. So what about Rinoa? She's the only one that doesn't fall into the whole orphanage thing. Well, we find out that she's the daughter of Julia, the woman that Laguna was originally in love with, and that her mother died when she was at a very young age, and she doesn't get along with her father. Yeah, and since we do meet the dad for a brief scenario, we do find out that they don't get along. Okay, so do we learn what caused the drift? Okay, what about if there's any part where something might come around that might heal the rift that Squall might have to do? He's just part of one scenario and then completely disappears from the story almost completely without any extra explanation about his importance to her backstory. Yeah, so Rinoa is not really well developed either. She's not unlikable, but not well developed enough to show she's gone through any pains of her own in a way that would help Squall or would make them want to be together. There's no real chemistry between them, and making their love affair kind of blah. And how blah? Well, Rain and Laguana only get one of his parts together. Rain altogether probably gets about 5 to 10 minutes of screen time. Yet, I believe their love story more than the freaking main one. And I would also believe the love story between him and Julia had they had more time to share more than one scene, considering how the game's actual main theme is about their relationship. See why I say this game's story is a hot mess. And oh, and for those who say I'm heartless about Squall's abandonment issues, I'm not going to get into my own personal life, but I have dealt with depression and anxiety before, and I can tell you, it's no excuse to act like a giant asshat that we see Squall act through the majority of the game. And yes, I do know finding the right girl can change your perspective, but there's got to be something they add to each other, or it just doesn't work. And together, they add nothing to each other. Final Fantasy would go and work on another love story in 10. This time they would get it a lot better. Yuna and Tidus work off each other. Tidus starts off as soft. He's from a city that is basically a utopia and is thrown into a society that's been on a tipping point of total annihilation for over 1,000 years. So he's soft and a bit spoiled, but not to the point that he's completely unlikable or completely unrelatable. But he sees things as the value of life and the importance of living, and he knows it can be enjoyable. Yuna, on the other hand, has lived in this hell for her whole life and sees the only way of bringing hope to the people, even if it's just a brief glimmer that will be eventually snuffed out, is for her to literally walk to her death. It's why the ending works so well. Tidus finds something that is worth sacrificing for, and Yuna does find life is indeed worth living. Squall and Rinoa, on the other hand, have nothing in the way of chemistry, and it's always seemed forced, and in the end, I didn't give a damn about either one of them. Well, with all this bashing, is there anything good that I can say about Final Fantasy VIII story? Well, first, as I say, those Lugano parts are really good. But when it comes to the main game, does it do anything good at all? Well, the world they create, while not as good as 12, does come really close. It's one of the most unique worlds I've ever seen in a JRPG. It's a weird, most of the world like it's from the 60s or 70s, but it has a fantasy elements to it. You can travel on trains, you can rent cars, but at the same time you have these flying garden fortresses. It's a really unique looking and feeling world, and it gets better when you get to Ethar and find out it's kind of the Wakanda of Final Fantasy, this hidden country with super advanced technology. Just looking around these same places and exploring the city, it was just really fun exploring all the unique environments. It's too bad the story and the characters around it sucked, and it really brought down the fun that I should have had exploring this world. So my thoughts on the story is it's not the worst JRPG story. Squall and Rinoa's love story may be bland, but it's not cringe like most of the Sword Art Online games' love stories are. Laguana is a good character, and the world is really fun. But the villains suck. The fact that none of the characters are fleshed out characters have real origins or dreams, they all just have the same past, makes it a disappointment in my book. Not my most loved story in a JRPG, but far from my most hated. I mean, I played through 2 Sword Art Online games this year, for crying out loud, folks. Still, in Final Fantasy VIII was about a man who is a retired and burnt out soldier who becomes a journalist and ends up making a decision that puts other people ahead of his own family and his own happiness, even when it makes him downright miserable for the rest of life. That is a game story I would love to play and explore. Not some game about another angsty anime teen. And if your whole goal was to focus on a bunch of love stories, then the couple who only gets about 10 minutes of screen time but has more chemistry than the two main leads, you know you done blew it, Square, with your storytelling on this one. So, what would I have done to change it? Well, I guess it's time for me as a very small YouTuber with no idea of how game development, planning, and budgeting gets to second guess some of the more popular game makers in the industry. But what would I do to fix this mess? Okay, first off, get rid of all of Laguna's playable scenes. Yeah, I love him as a character and think the game should have had him as the main lead and have his story being the main focus, but the way it is, having him here doesn't help out the main story one bit. It detracts from it. So it'd be better if the entire game focused entirely on Squall. With that bit out of the way, most of the things I would have changed about Squall would have been the whole orphanage thing. Yeah, having him abandoned by Ellen and all that can still happen, and it's not a bad story element, minus the GF parts. And if you do it right, you could really do him well. All you have to do is have Ellen be on the boat for about 12 to 13 years instead of 10. That would make Squall about 4 or 5 when he is separated from her. This would make him old enough to feel the hurt from this happening, but not old enough to remember it exactly, but still have childhood memories. I mean, how many things do you remember from when you're 4 clearly? You can then skip the whole GF bullcrap, and you can now remove all but maybe Irving or Quittis from the orphanage and now have them their own backstories and characters for the rest of the different stories. So you can explore these other characters, you can have different ideologies. You can now make Squall more different because he didn't have parents while the rest did, as well as other interesting areas of trauma that led to Squall kind of being a callous dickwad by the time the game happens. You can also form a line where if Adia was supposed to be his mother figure, that's how he thought and treated of her as a kid until one day mom was just gone and adoptive dad Sid had to take him away to train to become a mercenary to kill the sorceress. Keep Adia's helmet on for most of her appearances until the end of disc 2, when you can have the real tragic surprise for the hero that the whole entire time he was actually fighting his mother figure. It would have worked. In the meantime, also give us reasons to explore Rinoa's backstory, why she is trying to act so perky, what happens that turned her against her dad. Those things could now be exploited, and with flaws, a good romance story between them could actually happen. That's what I would change anyways with the heroes. As far as the villains, Ultimisha, if we're throwing Laguna out, then a lot of the time travel aspects, what do we do about her? Well, you could make her a follower to Abdel or some sort of prodigy who wants to take over Ethar and the world, and only Laguna is standing in her way. Yeah, Laguna playable parts are thrown out, but he still has a presence in the game which can be expanded on its own spin-off. Hey, if it worked for Zack Fair, it could work for Laguna. She could have had the ability to mind control people. Hence, Adia is still working with her against her own will, and she could be one of the girls Adele was searching for during the Laguna parts. With her in the present, you could have her be more part of the main game story. You could see her interact with Cypher in person, and even antagonize Squall in the party. If you see her and Ellen and Rinoa as threats to her because they have potential of becoming more powerful sorceress than her, it would give her motivation for some of the things she does, and it certainly would be better than the whole freaking time compression stupid bullshit. At any rate, thanks for watching this video and about me ranting about the game story. Click on the squares to see my review of the game and the other for what version of the game you might want to get if you're looking at the Steam versions.